Millionaire invites her black maid son to play chess as a joke. She didn't know he was a child genius. Do you really think the maid's son can tell a rook from a rolling pin? That was what she said, underestimating the boy. But in a few minutes she'll discover he's a genius. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from and subscribe because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. Do you really think the maid's son can tell a rook from a rolling pin? Those were the first words that sliced through the marble air of the Whitman mansion, sharp, amused, and dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from a lifetime of never being challenged. The charity dinner was in full sparkle that night. Crystal glasses caught the soft golden glow of chandeliers, designer gowns whispered across polished floors, laughter floated effortlessly from people who had never worried about bills or bus fares. And in the middle of it all stood Amelia Whitman, millionaire socialite, queen of the evening, and a woman who believed generosity began with a spotlight and ended with applause. She said the line loudly, intentionally, turning her head just enough so her guests could enjoy the performance. Her diamond bracelet flashed as she gestured toward a boy standing near the wall, Mateo Santos, 16 years old, skin the warm shade of sunlit bronze, posture straight despite carrying a tray twice that weight. He blinked once, calm, unreadable. He had been trained, by life, not tutors, to absorb humiliation without letting it leak through his expression. Emma, his mother, stood a few steps behind him. Her hands were steady, but her eyes betrayed her. 8 years working in this mansion, scrubbing floors so shiny they reflected her fatigue back at her, yet she said nothing. She was used to this. Used to the strange rule of the rich, that kindness was optional but cruelty was tradition. Amelia leaned forward with a smirk. Come now, it's a charity night. Let's have a little fun. How about a chess match? She pointed directly at Mateo with the casual arrogance of someone selecting a napkin, play against me. I could use a laugh. The guests chuckled. A few didn't, they looked at Mateo with a flicker of discomfort they quickly hid behind champagne glasses. This was the moment, the spark before the explosion. The moment when privilege mistook itself for power, when mockery dressed itself as entertainment. The moment when a boy who had spent 8 years studying in silence, waking at 4 a.m. to chase dreams nobody believed he deserved, was dragged into the center of a room that had never imagined someone like him could shine. Mateo held her gaze. Completely calm. Too calm. A stillness that should have warned her. He set the tray down with slow precision and said only one sentence, quiet, respectful, impossible to read. If you wish, ma'am. I can play. And though the room burst into laughter again, though Amelia waved her hand dismissively as if inviting him to a performance, something subtle shifted in the air. Because sometimes the most powerful storms begin with silence, not thunder. And on that night, in that mansion dripping with wealth and prejudice, a storm was already gathering behind Mateo's steady eyes. One that Amelia Whitman would never forget. The room hummed with polite conversation and the clinking of fine china, but every eye kept drifting toward Mateo. Some out of curiosity, some out of expectation that he would stumble, falter, embarrass himself. After all, he was the maid's son, a boy from the other side of the city who had never touched the luxury of silk or marble floors without someone else guiding him. Emma's hands gripped a cleaning cloth tighter than necessary as she hovered nearby, her posture stiff. She had always trained Mateo to endure, to hold his dignity like a shield. And now, standing in the very heart of the mansion, he was doing exactly that. No tremor, no sign of fear, just quiet, unshakable composure. Amelia, meanwhile, circled the room like a predator, her heels clicking against the marble. Every step, a subtle assertion of power. Every glance, a reminder that in this world, privilege spoke louder than merit. Come now, she said, her voice low but sharp, so that only the nearest guests could hear. Don't tell me he's never played chess before. Surely not. I'd hate to break him too quickly. She laughed, a casual, airy sound that carried condescension like perfume. Guests mirrored her reactions, some chuckled, some murmured approval, others stiffened uncomfortably at the cruelty masked as wit. And yet, even among the laughter, there were those who noticed Mateo's calm. The way he moved didn't betray doubt. The way he lifted his head, even in a room full of rich spectators, was steady. Unflinching. Amelia paused before the ornate chessboard laid out for the evening's display. Its pieces gleamed like ivory and ebony under the chandeliers. She gestured dramatically, as if presenting a showpiece. "Well, then. Shall we begin, little man? Try not to get overwhelmed." She winked at the crowd. "I'll go easy on you. Wouldn't want to ruin your evening, or your confidence." Matteo didn't smile. He simply nodded once and stepped forward. Each movement was precise, almost ritualistic, and in its precision lay a quiet defiance. For every ounce of mockery Amelia radiated, he responded with the same weight of calm authority that only years of preparation could produce. Emma's heart clenched. She had carried him through scraped knees, long walks to the library, broken computers repaired in dimly lit rooms. She had counted hours of solitary study and whispered encouragement. She knew this calm, measured posture wasn't just composure, it was the armor of someone who had survived against impossible odds. The guests watched, leaning forward in anticipation, unaware that the boy they expected to trip and fall was, in truth, the storm itself. And as Amelia made her first patronizing move on the board, the subtle shift began. Power, they would soon see, was not defined by wealth or laughter, it was defined by skill, patience, and quiet determination. Matteo's turn came. He leaned over the board, eyes scanning each piece like a general planning a battle. The room, so full of casual arrogance, still hadn't realized that the game about to unfold was not entertainment, it was reckoning. Amelia leaned closer to the chessboard, her eyes glittering with amusement. "Well, Matteo," she said, her voice sweetly venomous, "let's see if all that homework your mother forces you to do has actually taught you anything. I promise I won't be too rough. Wouldn't want to embarrass you in front of everyone." The room erupted in soft laughter, the kind that masked superiority with civility. Guests exchanged knowing glances, some whispering, "The poor boy doesn't stand a chance," while others sipped champagne, eager for the show. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, warm candle wax, and a tension that tingled like static. Matteo approached the table. His back straight, jaw firm, eyes calm as a lake at dawn. He had carried trays heavier than the weight of their judgment, endured stifling looks and hushed condescension. He had walked 3 kilometers to the library at 5 in the morning, studied broken computers by candlelight, and memorized over 200 chess openings that many grandmasters would envy. And now, this room full of laughter and glittering expectations thought they were about to watch a spectacle. They were wrong. Amelia tapped a pawn on the board with a slow, exaggerated gesture. "You know the rules, right? Pawn goes forward, knights jump, and, well, I suppose you've seen the board before?" She paused, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "I'll even start you off with a simple opening, don't thank me, just try to keep up." Matteo didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He didn't rush. With quiet precision, he positioned his first piece and countered her move in a way so natural it almost looked casual, but the pause it caused in the room was anything but. The guests' murmurs shifted. Laughter stumbled. A few gasps escaped. Emma, standing behind, caught her breath, clutching the edge of the marble counter to keep from trembling. 8 years of sacrifice, of scraped knees and sleepless nights, had brought her son to this moment. And here he was, calm, composed, prepared. Amelia's smirk flickered. She moved another piece, more aggressively this time, trying to mask her growing irritation with a veneer of humor. "Oh, clever move," she said, voice high-pitched, forcing a laugh. "I thought you'd be predictable. But no. She faltered for half a second, "you're not terrible." Matteo's eyes never left the board. He didn't respond. He simply played his next move, measured and precise. The room felt a collective pause, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Emma's fists clenched softly at her sides. Years of quiet preparation, stolen moments of practice, long walks and broken computers, and her son had turned the table, literally and figuratively, on the world that had underestimated him. The guests leaned in, some out of disbelief, others with growing unease. Even Amelia's closest friends shifted, sensing for the first time that the joke was no longer theirs to enjoy. She cleared her throat, forcing a laugh, but the edge in her voice betrayed her. The match had begun, but already, the power in the room had started to change. Matteo, the boy they had mocked, the slum kid, the son of the maid, had accepted the challenge. And in doing so, he had made it clear, he was not here for entertainment. He was here to play. Matteo reached for the first piece with deliberate care, his fingers brushing the smooth ivory of the pawn as though greeting an old friend. He placed it forward 2 squares, not with hesitation, but with certainty, a quiet assertion that stunned the room more than any verbal rebuttal could. Amelia raised an eyebrow, trying to maintain the smug superiority that had carried her through countless social battles. She responded with what she thought was a simple, safe move, expecting Matteo to falter, to misstep, to reveal his place in the hierarchy. But when he countered with a strategy so precise it mirrored openings she had only read about in glossy chess magazines, her lips twitched. She masked it with a laugh, but the flicker in her eyes betrayed her. The guests murmured softly. He's actually thinking, one whispered. That's unusual, isn't it? Another shook their head, uncertain, champagne in hand. The air, thick with expectations of amusement, grew tight, taut, like a string pulled to its limit. Matteo didn't speak. He never did. Every movement was a statement. Every pause, a command. When Amelia tried to force a trap, he bypassed it with subtle elegance, positioning his knights and bishops in a sequence that suggested experience far beyond his years. It was like watching a master composer conducting an orchestra of pawns and rooks. Emma, standing a few paces behind, felt a surge of emotion. She could remember the mornings when her son had woken at 4, the library 3 kilometers away his only sanctuary, the borrowed books and repaired computer that had been his tools. She had watched him memorize openings, analyze grandmasters' games, and practice in solitude when there was no one to watch, no one to validate him. And now, in this glittering hall, those years of labor were manifesting silently, brilliantly, in the young man before her. Amelia's voice rose slightly, a forced lilt that was meant to be playful, but came out sharp. Interesting, very interesting. You might actually know what you're doing. But let's not get too carried away, little one. She moved another piece, trying to regain control, to remind him, and the room, who was supposed to be in charge. Matteo tilted his head ever so slightly, eyes scanning the board. Then, in a smooth, decisive motion, he moved a bishop in a pattern so calculated that it both defended and threatened simultaneously. The room drew in its collective breath. The game was no longer entertainment. The air shifted imperceptibly, subtly at first, then undeniably. The boy had the upper hand, and Amelia, for the first time, was realizing she might have underestimated him. Guests leaned closer, some shocked, some unsure how to react. A few dared to whisper to one another, "He's really good." Amelia's friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing a crack in the polished armor of privilege. And behind it all, Emma's chest tightened with pride. Matteo's calm, measured gaze never left the board. Each move was silent but resounding. Each calculation precise, deliberate. The opening moves were over, but the real story had just begun. The boy they had mocked was no longer playing for amusement, he was playing for respect, and soon, they would all see exactly what he was capable of. Matteo's next move was subtle, almost unnoticeable to anyone who hadn't studied the game with obsession. But those who watched closely, the few guests who knew the rules, caught it instantly. He had trapped her queen's knight in a pattern so precise it was nearly poetic. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Amelia's smirk faltered. She tapped a diamond-encrusted fingernail against the edge of the board, pretending to be amused, but the tightening of her jaw betrayed a flicker of unease. "Clever boy," she said, voice clipped, attempting casual superiority. "You might just last a few moves longer than I expected." Matteo did not respond. He never had to. His fingers hovered over the board, poised, calculating, as if every piece were an extension of his own mind. And in that moment, the room faded away. Only the board, the pieces, and the quiet rhythm of his thought existed. It was impossible for the guests to know the hours that had led here. A flashback unfolded in the mind's eye, vivid, unrelenting. At 4:30 in the morning, 8 years earlier, Matteo had risen before the sun. The city streets were empty, damp with dew, and the distant hum of early traffic barely audible. He walked 5 kilometers to the small public library, the worn sneakers of his only pair flapping softly against cracked pavement. The library smelled of old books and ink, a sanctuary far from the mansion, far from judgment, far from pity. There, under flickering fluorescent lights, he studied relentlessly. Chess books borrowed from a collection meant for adults, diagrams marked in pencil, annotations on every page. He traced the strategies of Kasparov, Fischer, and Carlsen, memorizing over 200 different openings and the subtleties that separated amateurs from masters. He practiced silently, moving invisible pieces across imaginary boards while the world slept. At home, when the power went out, he studied by candlelight. He repaired a broken laptop with tools his mother had saved up for months to buy. He sacrificed birthdays, holidays, and friendship invitations. Emma had watched quietly, sometimes holding back tears as she worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table, proud but aware of the cost. Every early morning, every walk, every hour of meticulous practice had been a seed. And now, in the gilded hall of the Whitmans, that seed was growing into something unstoppable. Back in the present, Matteo shifted his night with the same calm precision as 8 years of preparation had taught him. The room gasped. Amelia's lips parted, uncertain, as the crowd began to sense that the boy they had dismissed as a curiosity was something entirely different, a prodigy. Emma, standing behind him, exhaled softly, almost a sigh of relief. Pride and worry wove together in her chest. Her son had endured years of quiet labor, obscured by his mother's invisibility in this world, and now the truth of that effort was emerging, silently, eloquently, irrevocably. The guests' laughter had stopped. Their murmurs were now tinged with awe, confusion, even guilt. Amelia's eyes narrowed. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that power could not be faked, and that talent, discipline, and resilience were forces beyond her control. Matteo's next move approached, a move that would leave the room in stunned silence, and force Amelia to confront the reality she had so confidently dismissed. Amelia's hands trembled ever so slightly as she moved her bishop, forcing a complicated line in hopes of regaining control. "Well, well," she said, voice tight but attempting to mask panic, "you are clever, aren't you? Let's see how far that cleverness gets you." Her smile was brittle, the laughter around her now nervous, uncertain. Matteo leaned forward, eyes scanning the board with unshakable calm. Each calculation, each counter, was executed with precision honed through years of unseen labor. The guests shifted in their seats, leaning closer, as if proximity might reveal the secret behind the boy's brilliance. Some whispered, "He's unstoppable," others muttered apologies for ever assuming he could be dismissed. In a subtle motion, Matteo executed a move that trapped her rook, an elegant maneuver that spoke of decades of theoretical knowledge compressed into one decisive strike. Amelia's breath caught. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She had underestimated him, again, and the room sensed it. A flashback unfolded, swift but vivid, as if the present were bending to reveal the past. It was a rainy afternoon, Matteo sitting on the cracked linoleum floor of their small apartment. His mother, Emma, was exhausted from working 2 jobs, bringing home barely enough to cover rent and groceries. She sat nearby mending her uniform, hands worn and calloused, yet moving with precision born of necessity. Matteo traced chessboard patterns in a notebook, scribbling opening variations by candlelight. "No parties, no celebrations," he whispered to himself. "Every hour counts." Birthdays passed with only a small piece of cake, a quiet wish for a better tomorrow, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Broken computers had been repaired with ingenuity, library books carried home and returned, pages frayed but memorized, notes in the margins documenting every move of legendary players. Emma had watched him silently, pride and pain interwoven. She could see the discipline etched into every line of his face, the determination pressing him forward despite scarcity. She had given him the tools she could, and he had turned those meager offerings into mastery. Back in the mansion, Matteo's bishop captured a pawn, forcing a subtle chain reaction across the board. Amelia's smile had vanished completely, replaced by a thin line of tension. Her friends exchanged glances, realizing that the night they had anticipated as entertainment had transformed into a revelation. The boy was not just competent, he was extraordinary. Emma's eyes filled with quiet tears. Every early morning, every missed opportunity, every painstaking sacrifice was culminating here, in front of people who had assumed that wealth automatically equated to superiority. And yet, here he was, moving with dignity, intelligence, and authority they had never imagined from someone like him. The room's atmosphere shifted. Where laughter had once reigned, there was now a palpable tension, as if the chandeliers themselves held their breath. Even Amelia's voice, usually sharp and commanding, faltered. The first real crack in her confidence had appeared, and Matteo, calm and deliberate, had caused it. The next moves would not just determine the game, they would begin to unravel the illusions of power that Amelia had built her life upon. Matteo's hand hovered over his knight for a moment, the room holding its collective breath. Then, with deliberate calm, he moved it into a position that both threatened Amelia's queen and protected his own vulnerable pieces. The elegance of the maneuver was undeniable, the precision, frightening. Gasps rippled through the guests. Even the most confident among them instinctively leaned forward, as if proximity could explain the boy's mastery. Amelia's fingers tightened around a pawn. Her voice, usually a weapon of casual superiority, now trembled slightly. "Impossible," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. How could, she swallowed hard, trying to mask panic with forced amusement. Her smirk, so carefully cultivated over decades, faltered. This was no ordinary child. This was something else entirely, a force she had ignored at her peril. A final flashback flashed before Matteo's eyes as he contemplated the board. It was the early mornings at the public library, years of endless repetition. The worn books stacked unevenly on the wooden table. Every page memorized, every game replayed silently, hours spent analyzing patterns of grandmasters like Kasparov and Fischer. He had taught himself the nuances of attack and defense, endgames and openings, long walks home imprinting strategies into his memory like a second heartbeat. He remembered nights by candlelight when the electricity failed, scribbling moves in a tattered notebook, imagining opponents across the board. Birthdays passed unnoticed. Friends' invitations ignored. Broken computers painstakingly repaired with ingenuity. Every small victory in practice had been an unseen triumph. Every sacrifice had been stored, waiting for this very moment. Emma had worked tirelessly, 2 jobs earning barely $650 a month, her hands roughened from scrubbing floors and washing linens. She had never interfered, never boasted, never demanded. But she had given him everything she could, quiet encouragement, unwavering faith, and the dignity to persist when the world assumed he would fail. And now, in the middle of Amelia Whitman's glittering mansion, all those years, all that discipline, all that sacrifice, coalesced into one inevitable truth: Matteo was not a boy to be mocked. He was a master in his own right, quietly, perfectly, irrefutably. Returning to the present, Matteo's next move left Amelia's pieces vulnerable, her carefully laid traps collapsing one by one. Her hands shook, and she realized with a sinking feeling that this was no longer a game of amusement, it was a revelation, a reckoning. The room was silent now, the laughter gone, replaced by awe and disbelief. The power dynamic had shifted. Emma's eyes welled with pride, but she did not move. Her son had carried her sacrifices with grace, now the world was beginning to see it too. And Matteo, calm as ever, allowed the board to tell the story of years of unseen labor, discipline, and brilliance, one move at a time. The stage was set for the final blow. The checkmate, and the absolute reversal of the power Amelia had assumed she wielded so effortlessly, was imminent. Matteo's hand moved with calm precision, sliding his queen into position. The room went still. Check. For 15 seconds, no one dared breathe. The chandeliers above cast cold, glittering light across Amelia Whitman's face, highlighting the tightening of her jaw, the twitch at the corner of her eye. She opened her mouth to speak, to dismiss it as luck, but no words came. The room waited, the impossible truth hanging like a heavy curtain. She had been defeated by the boy she had mocked. The guests stared, stunned. Whispers began quietly, spreading like a wave. He did that on purpose. That was perfect. The boys, incredible. Laughter had vanished, it was replaced by awe, disbelief, even shame. They had been complicit in her cruelty, and now they were witnesses to its unraveling. Amelia's hands hovered over the board, then fell limply to her sides. Her voice, brittle and high, attempted bravado. A fluke. Just beginner's luck. But her tone lacked conviction. Every eye in the room recognized the truth she could not speak aloud. The boy had earned this victory, meticulously, quietly, brilliantly. Emma stepped forward, her worn hands shaking slightly but her spine straight. Her voice, steady but fierce, cut through the tension. "This is no fluke," she said. "He is not the slum kid you mocked. He is my son, and he has worked every day of his life for this moment." A hush fell over the room. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding Amelia's eyes, some daring to meet Mateo's. The irony was palpable. The boy who had been expected to entertain them with failure had instead commanded their respect without saying a single word. Mateo finally looked up from the board, eyes meeting his mother's. There was no gloating, no satisfaction in her triumph. Just quiet dignity. Years of sacrifice, discipline, and study had manifested not in arrogance, but in calm authority. Amelia's mouth opened again, and this time, the words failed her completely. The board was set, the pieces immovable. Checkmate. Silence. Victory. The room shifted. Where laughter and mockery had once ruled, there was now an almost reverent tension. Power, it seemed, was not defined by wealth or status, but by knowledge, perseverance, and character. Amelia's social armor had cracked in the quietest way possible, shattered by a boy who had been underestimated from the very start. Emma exhaled, tears threatening to fall. Pride and relief mingled in her chest. Her son had proven what she had always known: talent and resilience could never be dictated by social class. Mateo stood, collected, composed, and offered no words of triumph. The lesson was in the silence. The lesson was in the board. The lesson was in the truth: the boy they had dismissed had won, and with that win, he had begun to rewrite the rules of the room, and perhaps, the world. The room was silent, the aftermath of the checkmate hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Amelia's usual sparkle had vanished. Her shoulders slumped ever so slightly, and her voice, when it came, trembled. I don't believe this. I mean, it's just a game." Emma stepped forward, the sound of her shoes on the marble echoing softly but with authority. She held her head high, no trace of fear in her gaze. "It is a game," she said, voice steady, "but it is also a measure of respect. My son is not here for amusement, and he is not here to be mocked. He is Mateo Santos, and he has earned every move you just lost to." The guests shifted uneasily, some avoiding Amelia's gaze, others finally looking directly at the boy they had dismissed. The laughter, so quick and casual before, had been replaced by murmurs of recognition, awe, and discomfort. The balance of the room had shifted entirely. Amelia's privileged facade, which had commanded this space for decades, now seemed fragile, brittle, and hollow. Mateo, calm as ever, met his mother's eyes and nodded subtly. There was no triumph in his smile, only quiet acknowledgement. Every early morning, every long walk to the library, every hour of solitary study and sacrifice had led to this moment. And now, for the first time, the world in the marble-walled room was forced to see it. One of the guests, a congresswoman who had attended on the charity panel, cleared her throat softly. "Remarkable," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "Truly remarkable." Her gaze lingered on Mateo, not as a curiosity, but as someone whose brilliance demanded recognition. Others began to nod, murmuring quietly among themselves, acknowledgement slowly replacing the earlier amusement. Amelia's friends, once laughing companions, now avoided her eyes. The room, which had been her stage, no longer belonged to her. The subtle social cues were unmistakable. She had lost not only the game, but also the respect of everyone present. Emma's voice, firm and unwavering, cut through the tension. Privilege does not make one noble. Wealth does not grant wisdom. True merit comes from dedication, resilience, and character. My son has shown all three tonight. A hush settled over the guests. Amelia opened her mouth, searching for words, but none came. The only sound was the faint clink of a fallen chess piece, testament to the lesson just delivered. For the first time in her life, Amelia faced the consequences of her assumptions. And in that quiet, powerful moment, the moral of the evening was clear: respect is earned, not granted, and no amount of wealth or social standing could erase the truth that had unfolded on that chessboard. Matteo gathered himself, his composure absolute. Emma's hand brushed his shoulder gently, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had endured together. The room, now fully awake to the injustice of their assumptions, held its collective breath. The reckoning was complete, and the world had shifted just a little, one move at a time. The room, still buzzing with disbelief, held a new energy. The tension that had hung like fog over Amelia's mansion now gave way to quiet admiration for the boy who had conquered both the board and the assumptions of everyone present. Congresswoman Mills, who had watched the match in awe, stepped forward. Her voice was calm but commanding. "Matteo," she said, addressing the boy directly, "what you've demonstrated tonight is not just talent, it's discipline, intelligence, and perseverance. I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to Stanford University. You have earned the chance to take your skills far beyond this room." Gasps and murmurs filled the hall once again. Guests who had laughed at him hours ago now whispered in reverence. Amelia's lips parted, searching for a response, but even her wealth and privilege could not conjure a defense. She remained speechless, powerless in a moment that no amount of money could rewrite. Emma's eyes welled with tears, pride shining through the fatigue of years spent laboring unseen. She stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Matteo's shoulder. "You've earned every opportunity, my son," she said softly. "Never forget that your diligence, your heart, and your character have brought you here." Matteo nodded, his voice calm but filled with quiet conviction. "Thank you, ma'am," he said to Congresswoman Mills. "I promise I'll work hard, and I'll make the most of this opportunity, not just for me, but for others who don't have the chance to be seen." Guests, previously complicit in Amelia's mockery, now turned their gazes away from her. The subtle power shift was complete. The boy who had once carried trays and endured ridicule now stood at the center of attention for the right reasons. Amelia, her diamonds gleaming but her pride in ruins, looked around at the faces of her peers. Whispers and judgments began to form, friends avoiding her eye contact, social clubs reconsidering invitations, charities quietly noting the evening's humiliation. Emma exhaled, relief and pride mingling. For the first time, she and Matteo were recognized not as servants or entertainers, but as equals in a room that had once believed equality was dictated by wealth. Matteo had transformed the evening from mockery to revelation, from humiliation to opportunity. And as he accepted the scholarship, the reality of what had just unfolded settled into the hearts of everyone present. Brilliance cannot be contained by circumstance, and merit cannot be ignored, no matter how wealthy or powerful one believes they are. The first step toward a new life had begun. Matteo had claimed his place, not through wealth, not through connections, but through the unassailable strength of skill, perseverance, and character. 1 year later, Matteo Santos walked across the Stanford campus with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with earned accomplishment. The scholarship Congresswoman Mills had offered had been only the first step in a journey that began with early mornings, long walks to libraries, and years of tireless study. Now, at 16, he was thriving among peers who respected his intellect, his discipline, and his unwavering calm. News of the chess match at the Whitman mansion had gone viral. 3 million views later, the story had touched hearts across the country. Interviews highlighted not just his skill, but the sacrifices that had brought him there, 8 years of practice, 5 kilometers walked to the library, birthdays skipped, and over 200 chess openings mastered. Matteo had refused to let bitterness guide him, focusing instead on inspiring others. With Emma by his side, now promoted to cleaning supervisor at a 5-star hotel with triple her previous salary and benefits, their lives had transformed. Matteo had launched a free online chess program for youth from underserved communities. Already, 1,500 students had benefited, learning not just chess, but resilience, discipline, and the dignity of hard work. Meanwhile, Amelia Whitman faced the consequences of her arrogance. Her golf club membership had been revoked, her name quietly removed from charities, and her social circle had thinned to almost nothing. Wealth could not shield her from the fallout of public awareness, nor from the stark contrast between entitlement and earned respect. She was left alone, a lesson in hubris she could not ignore. Matteo reflected on the journey, not with resentment, but with gratitude. He understood that true nobility came not from diamonds, champagne, or mansions, but from perseverance, sacrifice, and character forged under adversity. The boy who once carried trays in a mansion now carried a message: circumstances do not define potential, determination does. In interviews, Matteo spoke with the same calm dignity that had won him the chess match. "I want others to know," he said, "that your background doesn't limit your future. You can rise, not by stepping on others, but by building yourself and helping those around you." Emma smiled proudly, her worn hands now symbols of endurance and victory. Together, they had turned humiliation into triumph, mockery into inspiration. The ripple effects of one evening continued to grow, students inspired, opportunities earned, social injustice challenged. And as for Matteo, the boy they had once laughed at, he was no longer just a chess prodigy. He was a living reminder that talent, hard work, and integrity could outmatch privilege every time. The moral was clear, and the lesson enduring: true greatness is measured not by wealth or status, but by the resilience of character, the courage to pursue one's gifts, and the determination to lift others along the way. Matteo Santos had transformed a single night of humiliation into a lifetime of impact, proving that brilliance, nurtured in adversity, can shine brighter than any diamond. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.